um, and so the good news is that there's a whole kind of government and public sector movement around what works. If you can Google at some point the What Works network, or we can send you links around to it. And you'll see that there are lots of, I think there's about 14 organizations at the moment, and we're kind of on track to become one of them, hopefully. We're starting to become one of them. But they cover all kinds of fields. Like there's one called the Youth Endowment Fund, which is particularly focused on preventing young people from joining gangs and getting involved in crime while they're still young. There's another one called the Education Endowment Fund, which is about figuring out what works in primary school education. There's one called the Centre for Children's Social Care, which again obviously figures out what works best for the best outcomes for children in social care, and so on. So yeah, so I really encourage you to look at these this network of what works centres. They're kind of great. I thought that some of it's quite technical about how evidence works and data and things. So I thought rather than, I can send you afterwards some sort of technical detail about the structure of how we do our work, but I thought it might be quite good just to show you a quick example of a project that we've done recently for a county council, for Camden Council. Does that sound like a good plan? Just to show a tangible.
Just so you're aware of time, we've only got about 7 minutes left. Just in terms
of me talking, or in total?
Of you talking.
Oh, fine.
And it would be really good to particularly hear about how you're thinking about social infrastructure.
Oh, fine. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it'd be great to show an example of the project, but
yeah. Let me talk about social infrastructure then. I'm just going to share some. Can I share my? Can I do a screen share?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'll just go on to present mode. Don't worry, I'm not going to present. Oh, look, here we go. Good morning. I can send you all these slides, so don't worry, I won't run through them all. Here's our approach. Here are our guiding principles. I think that I'll just say one quick thing, which is I think that we are all about urgency and action. We treat the problem of disconnection as a problem like climate emergency or knife crime. We treat it as something that needs radical and urgent attention. And then I just want to say something about the third change can best be brought about through changes to, and this comes onto social infrastructure. Our view is that if you want to encourage more connection in the UK, the best way to do it is to make changes to the context in which connection takes place, and that's kind of what we mean by social infrastructure. So that's why we're interested in working with big organizations who already have scale. So that might be working with public sector organizations like councils, but it might be private sector firms like retailers like Tesco, or social media firms like Facebook and Nextdoor. And we're excited by that because those organizations, in our view, can make small tilts in the way that they structure themselves or set themselves up, which could make big differences to the level of connection in the UK. So yeah, what we mean by social infrastructure is, well, so we've done lots of work about these interactions between essential workers, essentially between, as we call, people who work in a neighbourhood and people who live in the neighbourhood. So it's an interesting idea. For example, in Camden, on any given day in Camden, there's about 1 million of these kind of interactions that take place in Camden, which is a borough in London of about 300,000 people. So there's about 1 million of these interactions every day, these everyday interactions. We're interested in what can happen differently in shops, or in the way that street cleaning is set up, or in the way that social care is set up, or buses work, to bring about more connectedness. And I was just going to say something about
Oh dear.
Infrastructure,
We're sort of losing you a bit, Harry.
which I think would be helpful to say. I've just got 3 or 4 photos of an estate here, which I was going to show you. Can you hear me and see me? Is that better if I come off screen share?
It's still a little bit dodgy.
Is that better? Reconnect to a different. I'm going to just try something. Won't be a second. That should be better now.
Yeah, we can hear you better now.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. Yeah, I just wanted to say about social infrastructure. I'll just share my screen again for 1 sec. So social infrastructure is the way we think about social infrastructure is it's everything that exists in a world, physical and digital. So the way that Facebook is configured, or the way that it's Facebook's newsfeed's algorithm works, is all part of social infrastructure. It's the things which set the context and conditions for how people interrelate or interact. And so the sort of most ready and best examples of social infrastructure, the ones which come first to mind, are always parks or libraries, or things like that, and things in the built environment. But I just thought this is an interesting quick case study of how kind of complex and contested sometimes social infrastructure can be. We were doing work on this particular estate in Camden called the Amphil Estate in Somerstown in Camden. And there's this community hall. So you can just see it here, Amphil Square Community Hall. And I was very excited to see the community hall. I said, oh, that sounds great, a community hall. Surely that's kind of part of the answer to what can bring about more reconnection on this estate, which was kind of a question which we were trying to help think about. But then when we got to the hall, we found that it was surrounded by this scary looking metal fencing. And you can't read it here, but it has a sign which is in a few different languages, but is basically, it sort of explains the rule. It just goes straight in with rules and regulations. And it says how to contact the key holder and gives a landline phone number. So in other words, just the presence of a community hall is great, but it comes with lots of affordances and complexity about how it's used and how it can be accessed by people. I'm a Somali community who lived on the estate, and we heard that they were trying to get access to the hall for events, but they didn't have representation on the TRA, the Tenants and Residents Association, which meant that they found it hard to book the hall, and there was kind of hostility towards their group for using the hall. And so you quickly get into kind of what's kind of really going on in a place, and social infrastructure and what kind of access people have to it, and how usable it really is. So, and then it just also, I guess it's my last slide I was going to show you, but it's just also really interesting. This is, can you see, I think you can see where my mouse is moving, but right in the middle is this large estate. It's got 3 big blocks and a couple of thousand people who live on it. And if you can almost just think of the estate itself in terms of social infrastructure, it is hemmed in on 3 sides by non-social infrastructure, by huge train tracks and big bypasses and gasworks, and Euston Station to its south. So just the way that, and just across the way, you can see Regent's Park just to the west of it. And so just the way that things are set up, the hall itself and the way access to the hall is mediated, but also the situation of the hall in its estate and the situation of the estate in the surrounding neighbourhood, kind of all, I think, forms part of social infrastructure. Yeah, that's just an observation from a recent project about social infrastructure. I was going to say one other, Rachel, you just when you were setting up this, introducing, you mentioned about Facebook as well. We're also doing some work with AI engineers at Facebook to think about literally the newsfeed algorithm, to think about what can be changed in a way that news and contacts and stuff is connected on, is presented to people on Facebook, and how that might be able to be modified or tweaked in order to to encourage wider connection between people, or give people more of a sense of possibility of connecting across lines of difference on social media. So those same fences which sometimes surround a community hall can also express themselves, if you like, as algorithmic rules in digital services, which constrain or hem people's ability to connect. And that's the kind of thing which we're interested in helping organizations to find solutions to in order to encourage more social connectedness, which is our aim. So yeah, I hope that's been a useful quick ramble and a dip into what we're doing, and very happy to send you all more about us and some examples of the different methods that we use, if that would be helpful.
Thanks, Harry. Rachel, I don't know if you've got any questions, but well, and everyone, I suppose.
I would rather open it up and see if anyone else has, and then I have a couple up my sleeve in case not.
Okay.
One thing I'll just say then before we open it up, I think the thing I'm endlessly fascinated with this conversation about social infrastructure, which certainly Rachel and I have had many conversations about, is, you know, Rachel's talked about how does social infrastructure keep up with technology, and I guess there's still a question for me of like, are we, what are the benefits, or the what are the pros and cons of us thinking of social infrastructure being like the digital realm, or like Facebook being considered as social infrastructure alongside a park or a community centre?
Yeah.
And I don't, you know, and it feels like in a way your work, Harry, and I think it's quite similar to the Civic Signals work in the US as well, is in some ways thinking, you know, what are the barriers what are the things that you experience with social infrastructure in the physical realm, and how can you try and remove those as barriers in the digital realm?
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's even helpful to separate physical and digital anymore. That might be a bit old school, because you know, you're always moving around with your phone, blah blah blah. But I am really interested in what happens in the physical realm as well, and how we need our, like, what else do we need from that now because of technology? And those are two, I think, different things. Anyway, I'm just throwing that into the mix. It's not really a question. That's normally what men do in Q&As. They don't give a question, they give an observation. Sorry, that's a bit harsh.
Yeah. No, it's true. I think I think you're right, Cassie. I think it makes sense just to think in a continuous way across digital and physical, and indeed sort of hybrid digital physical experiences, because of course lots of it's hybrid, isn't it? You know, walking around a town with a smartphone is you're kind of doing both at once. Or using local social apps like Store or WhatsApp groups and things is you're kind of interacting with your close neighbours, but you're doing so through a screen. So it's very much a continuum. It makes sense to think of it as a blur. And also I think that helpfully the same sorts of conditions for what makes for connection broadly apply across physical or digital contexts. The best, I mean, the sort of core bit of social theory about connection is from 1954, so from millions of years ago, and Allport in the US. In fact, he was Canadian, and he talked about contact theory and gave 3 or 4 conditions for successful contact theory. And this was a revolution at the time. It was one of the things which kind of led to the civil rights movement in the US, and as people kind of understood that contact between black and white people in America was something that would lead to harmony and be a good thing rather than something to be avoided, which was this sort of post-war segregationist view. So his his ideas on contact theory were completely revolutionary. They seem and are worth kind of Wikipediaing to see about. But broadly speaking, the same conditions for what makes good connection work apply online or physically. And broadly speaking, I think those are kind of meeting in some kind of equal way, or having a sort of presumption of a trusted system around you. So, for example, one of the reasons why parks work well for social connection is that people all have an equal entitlement to being at park. There isn't a hierarchy about park use. Everybody who's in a park is equally part of that park and entitled to be in a park. So that's one condition. Another one is finding common ground, or ideally having common purpose, having something that you need to get done together, having a mission, having a job to be done, and which something that kind of puts you shoulder to shoulder with strangers so that you can sort something out together or fix something. So I know everyone's got experience from kind of, often meeting strangers or meeting neighbours for the first time because you've both dealing with a problem or getting something done. And just kind of a trusted system which gives people presumption of good intent. So a sense that they can tilt towards expecting that new people or strangers will be friendly and that the interaction will go well. That kind of reduces removes or reduces the social risk from new interactions. I just see on chat, I know you're mentioning a brilliant book by Eric Klinenberg about social infrastructure, mainly in the States, but that's a superb book to read as a kind of primer for social infrastructure. That Palace is for the People book.
To the fellows, sorry, because I did bug that.
Yeah, sorry, fellows. Any questions?
I've got a question.
Hi, Paul.
Hi. I was really interested in what you're saying about community centres and accessibility. And in the 1980s, I worked in what was then the Lesbian and Gay Centre in Manchester, and I've got a lot of experience of working particularly with LGBT centres, and actually huge issues around access and community and who's in and who's not. And as I get older, I'm just really, really clear that it's not sensible to talk about, even attempting to access the whole community. I mean, it's fine to have very specific groups. But I've been doing sessions in Zoom since the lockdown, and we've actually been able to reach out to quite a few people who would never access any sort of community centre for all sorts of reasons, however accessible you made it. And I think I'm quite keen to talk to people when we get back to more normality about continuing to provide services online for those people, but also recognising for some people they never access that. So I think it's been really useful recognising that there are people who will never get to a physical building. We're not reaching them at all unless we do it online.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's absolutely right. It's kind of the secret, I think, is in lots of different types of facilities or amenities or different types of infrastructure, so that something will work for everybody, but no one thing will work for everybody, certainly.
And I just wanted to kind of tease out there one of the things that is very different between digital and physical spaces is that I think in physical space we have a much clearer idea of who is listening and who is around, and what it's not exactly privacy, it's more about intimacy, right? And that there's a kind of tonal thing. And like one of the things that really struck me at the beginning of the lockdown in my neighborhood, I joined Nextdoor for the first time. And I kind of find Nextdoor to be a bit of a problematic thing for different reasons. But the thing that seemed extraordinary to me is that we would have people saying, I've lost a cat, or I'm self-isolating and can't leave the house, can anybody help me out? And then we would have the Met post to say, we've done a drugs raid and arrested 30 people, right? And these messages would all be sort of together. And I think there's something really interesting about both, like, how do we learn who to be in those different spaces, and can we be the same all the time? Because I think there's a sense we definitely have of that physically. And I was just wondering, like, you know, when you're talking about there being no distinction between those spaces, it feels to me that comes with very much an idea of privilege, that you're the kind of person who can be the same everywhere, and that doesn't apply to everyone all of the time.
Yeah, I'm sure that's right. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I didn't so much mean that anyone can be the same anywhere. I just meant that the same conditions which help you think about successful connectedness online often apply to offline, or vice versa. So some of the same approaches or thinking can work across those two different domains. But you're so right, Rachel, about, I think it gets called contact collapse, doesn't it, with theorists of social media. This idea that it's one of the reasons why there's such kind of dissonance of looking at Nextdoor or Facebook or spending time in those environments, is that everything comes at you indiscriminately, doesn't it? It's sort of a mix of, as you say, police information, kindness, offers for help, stuff from friends, commercial advertising. It all comes to you without kind of signaling or clarity or expectations of context. And as you say, we're used to navigating our way around the physical environment and the neighborhoods in a way that lets us better understand what's going on in each different place. We sort of know how to operate, or what it means when we're in a shop, or when we're on public transport, or when we're in a park or on a street. But as you're right, in social media, it all comes at you at once, and it's very much harder. So it can be very, very, very difficult. And also, I think you're right in terms of connecting, Rachel, as you started by saying, because it's very hard to know who else is around you. There's no peripheral vision online, is there, in the way that there is in the real world. And there's less, and also I think really interestingly, there's less peripheral vision and less chance encounter online. It's all very structured through optimized algorithms of what's going to best hold your attention, or what's best going to make money for the platforms. There's much less room, there's much less wiggle room, much less serendipity, much less space than can be offline.
I suppose there's kind of two things I pick up on there, and one of them I'm going to sort of look to Lisa actually for. But what's really interesting is, I think in the early days of social media, things were really optimized to allow you to bump into people in real life. You know, like there used to be a service that told you if you traveled to a city who you knew who was there, you know, and that actually there's been a shift away from strengthening our physical bonds to making sort of very much a different kind of connectivity. And I was just thinking, Lisa, about what you were saying earlier about kind of how you're now thinking about creating a portal in order to move people away from the behaviors they've slipped into on Facebook. And I just was wondering if you wanted to talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, sure. So we're looking at a community engagement portal where it's a one size fits all for all the different groups in Manchester to come together, and we're looking at different tools on there. So there'll be a place for open discussion and forums, because what we found within the neighbourhoods is that the Facebook pages can get quite reactive and can get quite personal, and it's been quite negative in some areas. Whereas if we moved it onto a portal that was moderated, hopefully we'll get over that problem. And that's not the only reason why we'd want to go onto a portal. One of the other reasons is so that we can have a place where all the information is held. So, for example, the City Council has a lot of policies around different things that impact on the environment, but people don't, and consultations, people don't always have access to those consultations. They don't know where to look for them, and they're not perhaps publicised as widely. So it's also a place where we can have more focused conversations about things that would impact on the environment, but that perhaps people are missing because they don't know where to look.
Sounds great.
There was something that I found really interesting in what we were talking about earlier as well, of moderation on the internet's existed since the internet, and somehow we've lost that in the way we use social media at the moment. So there's not an active moderator of a lot of Facebook groups, which again is why we need like the community platforms or somewhere to have that safe conversation. And I think for me, there's something both in the physical and online worlds in social context that's very rooted in safety. So whether that's because you are privileged to be yourself in whichever physical environment you find yourself, or you find safety in knowing that you're kind of only talking to the people who hold the same views of you as you on Facebook, or whatever it might be, there's something about how we've built our own safety around the way we use our voice or actions or behaviours in those different spaces. And I wonder if that's its own social infrastructure that we've created for ourselves as individuals.
You know, I think that's really interesting, particularly in the context of all the people, like one of the things that happens in like another bit of this debate is really talking about filter bubbles and disinformation and those kinds of things. And I think it's really interesting about kind of who has the safety to be able to willingly and happily expose themselves to other things. Like there's something about kind of what are the affordances of a space that allow you to take yourself out of your comfort zone, which I think is something that I think we definitely don't think about enough in digital design, because a lot of the responsibility is put onto the individual. It's kind of, you ought to be trying harder. And I think that's really important, actually. How are we doing for time, Cassie?
4 minutes left, so Lisa.
It's a slightly different point, but I wanted to ask Harry, what do you do if the data's not there? If people, because I think you said that your method is to work on data and evidence, but if you don't, what happens if you don't have the data and the evidence, and you want to have a conversation with somebody about something, but you lack the evidence?
Yeah, good question. I mean, basically, there's very rarely data and evidence, because most of what goes on has sprung up in an organic way, or isn't being kind of measured. So yeah, you can sort of seek evidence by asking, by either observing kind of what the impact is of what's happening, or by asking people's opinion about it. also you can look for, you can use proxies, so you can find something similar, or as similar as possible, or a couple of things which sort of triangulate towards being collectively similar to the thing you're trying to figure out, to see if you can find supporting evidence in those things having worked. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Lisa. It's a sort of slow and gradual process, but I should say it's very much there to encourage rather than to kind of constrain experimentation. It depends on experiments and a kind of blooming ecosystem of lots of different things happening locally and at a small scale or a big scale. So I think it would be, I hope we never get to a stage where things can't happen unless there's certain evidence for them before, because that'll stop experimentation and kind of local expression.
And this brings me back to my constant tedious thing of going on and on and on about the national data strategy and why it's such a problem, because it's kind of premised on the idea that there is data available to be collected about everything and everything can be understood. And it feels like actually there needs to be as much thought and effort going into where are the gaps and how can we represent those gaps and what do those gaps tell us about the world. You know, like a lot of the time, you know, about 2 years ago I gave a talk to some people in government about how data can be really problematic. And what was hilarious about it is I gave it in this like in a gallery at the British Museum, which is the ultimate example of how information is collected to support a way of understanding the world. Like when you go to the British Museum, a lot of it represents how Britain looked at the world 100 years ago. It isn't a true reflection. And I think that actually something that is really exciting is kind of how can you challenge the kind of evidence that is collected and how can you create alternatives. I think that's the site of real radicalism, actually. Even though it sounds like really boring, I think it's really radical and exciting. But anyway, that's just me. Does anyone have a last thing to say to Harry? Because if not, we probably ought to.
Yeah.
Thank you. Is that Terry or Rena or both?
Terry, you go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So I just had a quick question. So obviously there's like physical structures and there are obviously lots of forces of hate, and it's probably getting a bit more difficult to kind of identify what's what. So you have social media, you have news outlets and media, and I'd even say some of the traditional platforms such as the BBC and maybe The Guardian, it's a bit difficult to tell sometimes what their purpose is around how you identify what their output is in terms of good or bad. I was just wondering, once people kind of step out of this physical and into their silos, does that override some of the positive interactions that they might have when they interact with people from different backgrounds? So what's the balance of, you could go to school, meet lots of different kinds of people, have wonderful interactions, but then you enter your silos and access some of that content. So yeah, what do you think of that?
Thank you. That's a really great question, Terry, about those two worlds that people, because we all straddle those two worlds, don't we? In terms of the social circles we have, or the people we mix with, but also in terms of where we kind of access information and get news from. And I think that the quick answer is that the whole system requires a healthy balance between those two. And I think that people are stronger and more capable of mixing across difference if they are safe and secure kind of in their own environment or own bubble or own community as well, or in their family or whatever. So it definitely, and again, it's very much echoed in urban design, is that there have been lots of examples of buildings which work well, like campus or school buildings are good examples of where they work well because the spaces where everyone can mix and anyone can mix. So these public spaces, which kind of are quite sort of front stage or performative, but also there's a need to have backstage spaces where you can go and take stock and be perhaps on your own, or in small secure groups. So yeah, almost all successful systems, whether they're in the built environment or online, kind of require a balance of those two different worlds. Yeah.
Cheers.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. It's a great, good point.
Una, do you want to just jump in and then we'll...
Yeah, I have two just questions. One, in relation to the social infrastructure, how is that different from soft infrastructure? As in, is that considered a subset of soft infrastructure? Because the things you mentioned, parks, recreational places, also fit within soft infrastructure. So are they like, is it just when you include things like Facebook, or what's actually differentiating those two things? And the second thing was, you know, this issue around missing data, and sometimes I mean I just call that underserved sort of data, as in we're not collecting data from certain people or groups or communities. Have you done anything around smart cities? Actually, smart cities tend not to collect data from those people, but I always think actually that is almost like a new infrastructure that really we could structure it to better collect data, or information or intelligence, whatever you want to call it, from that group. That isn't being done now because big companies have stepped in, but there's no reason why communities, you know, shouldn't structure it with local authorities or things like that. So those are my two questions. I'm sorry if they're bigger than quick, but the quick answers we'll be happy with.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. I agree with what you're saying, Raina, on both points. I mean, on the second point, absolutely. And I think it's a really good point that data matters, because with data comes voice, and representation, and the ability to change things. So you're right, data is deeply partial and politicized, but it's kind of why it matters to do it right, because as you say, otherwise excluded or seldom heard or marginalized voices become even more marginalized. And to your first point about soft and social, I think it's all the same thing. I think that they're kind of, I think we're all talking about the same thing there, or they'd be kind of, yeah, as far as I know.
Yeah, I think soft and social infrastructure are probably the same thing.
Yeah, yeah.
We're going to have to move on. Harry, thank you for coming.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, it's been lovely. It's been great to meet you. And like I say, if there's anything where I can help, then do just email me, and I'll help you in any way I can.
Great. And yeah, if you don't mind sharing your slides, that would be great as well. I can forward them on.
I'll send them to you now.
Thank you for coming.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah,
great. Well, lovely. Great to see you all. Have a good lunch and afternoon. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you.
So we are, we've got 50 minutes left. Bear with me whilst I just get a thing. Can you all, if I put this in the chat, can you all open that and see a film with Rachel on it? Can you all see that?
Yeah.
Or is there anyone that can't? No, you've all got that.
No, I can see it.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's, yeah, you might want to sort of, well, I think it's about, how long is it again, Rachel? So you're muted.
It's just over half an hour.
Yeah,
Okay.
35 minutes.
Yeah. So ideally we would have a bit more time to talk about, you know, what we've just heard from Harry, but we're giving you more to look at and listen to, and then we'll come back and we'll hopefully have about 20 minutes to just process some of both things. But I'm really excited about Shannon. I don't know if those of you that use Twitter have your like favorites that you always go to, and I would say Shannon is one of my top 5 people on Twitter. She's so interesting. So I'm really excited that Rachel got to have some time with her. So yeah, I'm going to turn off I'm going to like close, I'll keep the room open, but if we each just go off and watch the video, and then we'll come back in 35 minutes to talk about it. So that will be at what time? 1:45. Yeah. So that's
Just a quick question, Cassie. Will you be able to share contact details with speakers if they're open to it?
yeah.
Thank you.
What we'd love, I mean, what I'd really like to do is try and bring all the speakers back maybe on the 10th, just for like 30 minutes, or like see if you're all up for doing like an evening thing in January, just as a kind of, I don't know, there's lots more we could do, but yeah, we can definitely get the contact details.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so see you in 35 minutes. Enjoy your movie.